Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth day of evidential hearings in Tranche 1, Phase 2 at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. My name is Neil Fernandez, and I am the hearings manager. For those of you in the virtual hearing room, please turn off both your camera and microphone unless you are invited to speak by the chairman, as Zoom will pick up on all noises and you will be on screen. I now hand over to the chairman, Sir John Mitting, to formally start proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. For the first 20 minutes or so, we're going to hear Ms. Monaghan summarising the evidence of an undercover officer and analysing the documents produced by another undercover officer who has not produced a witness statement. Ms. Monaghan.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. HN 299, HN 342, David Hughes. HN 299 served on the SDS from 1971 to 1976. He reported on the International Marxist Group throughout his deployment, but also on various other left-wing groups linked to the IMG and groups campaigning on Irish matters. Publication of his real name is restricted. HN 299 served in Special Branch before his posting to the SDS. Unusually for a police officer, he used to wear a beard, and he recalls that on a visit to Scotland Yard in 1968, this led to a senior Special Branch officer tasking him to attend Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, or VSC, meetings to get information on forthcoming London demonstrations and the planned march from Aldermaston. Wearing casual clothes, and he thinks using a fake name, he attended a number of meetings between February and April 1968, where he was able to gather a lot of information about upcoming protests, including the 17th of March 1968 VSC demonstration. He further recalls reporting to senior management that VSC members were planning to throw stones at the Daily Mirror building in response to perceived negative coverage of anti-Vietnam War protesters in its sister paper in Germany. When activists turned up, they were surprised by a large police presence. HN 299 recalls that senior management were very pleased with these reports, which earned him a commendation. He believes that the success of this reporting may have contributed to the genesis of the SDS. Other than his reporting on the VSC in 1968, HN 299 states that he did no further undercover work in Special Branch before joining the SDS. In 1971, the Chief Inspector of the SDS, Phil Saunders, recruited HN 299. He believes that Phil Saunders considered him suitable for the job because of his earlier reporting on the VSC. While he has no recollection of the content of his initial conversation with Phil Saunders, he thinks it likely that he told him about SDS work, and he remembers it as quite informal in tone. He joined the SDS fairly soon afterwards. Married at the time, he thinks that no manager spoke to his spouse about his new role and the possible impact on his family life. He had no training, formal or informal, for the role of an undercover officer, and believes he was deployed soon after joining the SDS. Despite the lack of formal training, he states that as Special Branch officers, they knew, or should have known, how appropriately to conduct themselves was deployed, and that he understands that SDS management tried to select officers who could be trusted to exercise good common sense and sound judgment. His cover name, David Hughes, he thinks he made up. It was not the identity of a deceased child. His cover background was that he'd come down from Glasgow looking for work. HN 299 recalls that he went up to Glasgow soon after joining the SDS and knocked on the door of well-known Glaswegian left-wing activist Tony Southall. He introduced himself and said he was interested in getting involved in left-wing politics. Tony Southall was friendly and encouraging. And in the field, HN 299 then alluded to his friendship with Tony Southall as a way of burnishing his credentials. It helped his cover when Tony Southall came down to London for meetings and demonstrations, and HN 299 was able to be seen talking to him. He had a driving license in his cover name, but no other cover documentation. Within 6 months of being deployed, HN 299 obtained cover employment as a van driver for a carpet supply and fitting business, an arrangement which was approved by the SDS office. HN299 had a number of cover flats throughout London, moving from one to the next, when the groups on which he reported changed the locations of their meetings. He got his first cover flat soon after entering the field and spent 6 to 8 weeks visiting places in the local area, such as pubs, shops, and the library, to establish his cover background. Once this was done, he started attending meetings. When he joined the SDS, HN299 recalls that he was not tasked to infiltrate specific groups, but was instructed to attend meetings. He found information on left-wing meetings in the agitprop section of Time Out, and as he had the autonomy to choose which ones to attend, he went to whichever looked most interesting. He asserts that to a large extent, he was left to his own devices. HN299 claims that the IMG is the group most likely to have regarded him an informal member, and he reported on it throughout his deployment. He describes falling in with the IMG after meeting people at publicly advertised meetings, who then invited him to other meetings. He thinks that the North London Claimants Union might also have considered him an informal member, as he was involved with them for 2 to 3 years, and he recalls involvement with the International Socialists. The documents show that he reported on several different groups: International Solidarity Campaign, or ISC, the Anti-Internment League, or AIL, Tottenham Red Circle, Fight On, the Troops Out Movement, or TOM, and on members of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and People's Democracy. He also reported on Marxist and Marxist-Leninist discussion groups held in private addresses. He recalls that the groups he infiltrated were not very organised, with no formal membership registers, and with people constantly drifting in and out. The reports show that the groups had aims, activities, and members in common. HN299 recalls hearing about most meetings he attended through word of mouth. He remembers very limited verbal participation in meetings, and he held no positions of responsibility. After meetings, he would sometimes go for a drink with group members. Throughout his deployment, HN299 believes he attended between 1 and 6 meetings per week, and quite often a demonstration on the weekend. As he would report on every meeting and most demonstrations he attended, he is certain that many of his reports are missing, such as those on a Marxist class in Streatham, most on the North London Claimants Union, most from the year 1973, and a number on forthcoming demonstrations and future meetings. He notes that none of his telephone reports, in which he would impart urgent information, appear in his pack. HN299 would submit his handwritten reports, which were similar in style and content to his special branch reports on groups or events, to the SDS office, who would type them up and make additions, such as file references. HN299 states that his previous experience of special branch reporting meant that when he joined the SDS, he knew the kind of information that would be of interest. He understood that he was expected to find out whatever information he could on the groups with which he came into contact. In particular, the SDS office were interested in any advance notification of an event which might present a public order issue, any information material to public order policing at forthcoming events, the identity of attendees at meetings and demonstrations, particularly those considered active rather than occasional participants, any major changes within a group, and the identities of those in charge of the groups and those who decided policy. In his reports on meetings and attendees, he would include the names of people he had not encountered previously in case they became prominent in future. And he acknowledges that they would sometimes have no further involvement with the group. In relation to upcoming demonstrations, he would report whatever information he came across, and understood that it would be used as part of a broader special branch assessment of how best to police that demonstration. HN299 believes that his reports on upcoming events assisted in making sure uniformed officers were present in the right numbers, and that they were ready to deal with potential issues when HN299 knew they might arise, such as groups splintering off from the main body of the protest. In this way, he believes his reporting helped uniformed police effectively to manage demonstrations. A possible example is a report on a Fight On film show before a TOM demonstration. HN299 recalls that it included a film of left-wing demonstrators breaking up a large fascist open-air meeting in Milan by routing the 10,000 police officers present. and that the intention of showing emotive films immediately prior to political demonstrations was, open quotes, clearly to whip up a militant aggressive mood in demonstrators, close quotes. He states that he believed it was important to impart to Special Branch that demonstrations arranged by Phaeton were more likely to turn violent, and for uniformed police to prepare appropriately. The first report in HN 299's pack is dated the 11th of November 1971, but he thinks it unlikely that this is the first he submitted. In it, HN 299 records that one of the attendees at the small Spartacus League / IMG meeting in an individual's bedroom was a bank robber with a history of violence. In a report regarding meetings to discuss tactics and policy for an upcoming students' demonstration, at which Piers Corbyn is present, HN 299 reports a request for, open quotes, 3 volunteers to take part in a special task during the demonstration, which would involve breaking the law, close quotes. HN 299 also reports on members of the IMG being instructed to join the Labour Party in anticipation of a split within it. HN 299 states that he was aware during his deployment of IMG efforts to infiltrate the Labour Party as a vehicle to achieve national prominence. He asserts that while he was not specifically tasked by the SDS office to obtain intelligence about subversion, he was aware that the infiltration of the Labour Party and trade unions by, open quotes, extreme political groups was of concern to both Special Branch and the Security Service, and so he reported on it when it arose. He believes that his reporting helped the Security Service to discharge their duties in relation to counter-subversion. He further states that while the IMG's entryism into the Labour Party was subversive, it was ultimately unsuccessful, and that generally the people on whom he reported talked a lot about revolution and attended many demonstrations, but did not actually engage in subversive activities. HN 299 states that he also reported on the IMG attempting to reach positions of prominence in TOM for the reason that some of its members advocated violence to achieve its political aims. And as such, in his opinion, an IMG-controlled TOM could present a serious threat to public order. There are additional reports on larger IMG gatherings which feature core participants to the inquiry, such as Tariq Ali and Piers Corbyn. HN 299 submits an evidence that Piers Corbyn was someone whom he recognised, but to whom he does not recall talking during his deployment, other than perhaps in passing. HN 299 also reports on a Marxist study session introduced by core participant Richard Chesham and attended by Mary. The documents show that HN 299 reported on the IMG's attitudes to the IRA, and he states that this was because Special Branch closely monitored the IRA and organisations that were supporting them, and passed information on to the Security Service. HN 299 reports on plans by the ISC, which was linked to the IMG, to carry out collections for the IRA around building sites, and also on Peter Gowan's assertion at a pre-conference meeting for London members of the IMG that its political committee intended changing their official slogan on Ireland from victory to the IRA to solidarity with the IRA. He asserts that the IMG's support for the IRA during his deployment was limited to verbal statements and to attending demonstrations advocating Irish republicanism. Attitudes to the IRA are also a feature of HN 299's reports on groups campaigning on Irish matters. He records the defection of an anarchist member of the People's Democracy to the North London Claimants Union because of the former group's, open quotes, unconditional, close quotes, support for the Provisionals bombing campaign in Northern Ireland. He states in evidence that support for indiscriminate violence by the IRA was not particularly common in the groups he infiltrated. And while many more supported targeted attacks against the state and capitalist interests, more than half of those he met who supported Irish republicanism were opposed to the use of lethal violence. On occasion, HN 299's reporting reflected his personal views. In one report on an occupation of a section of Eton's playing fields by AIL members, HN 299 describes the protesters' arguments as, open quotes, always pathetic, close quotes, and the demonstrators as, open quotes, a crowd of argumentative, half-inebriated Irish labourers, close quotes. HN 299 accepts that the tone of this report is sarcastic, and states that the SDS office never told him that this was inappropriate and or not permitted. In another report, HN 299 describes a speech on women's liberation as confining itself almost entirely to an attack upon men at the conference, which apparently elicited, open quote, squeals of delight, close quote, from female members of the audience. He describes the female members as completely dominating the session, as if to emphasize their liberation, using, open quotes, obscenities to punctuate their prose, close quotes, and as running onto the stage as often as possible for, open quotes, maximum effect, close quotes. A report on a Marxist class records an attendee's belief that come the socialist revolution in England, 2 million people who presented a permanent threat to its continuance, including senior police officers, particularly those in special branch, members of the security service, and all members of the Conservative Party would have to be liquidated. HN 299 notes in his statement that while some members of this class shared this belief, and that such views were present to varying degrees in activist groups like the IMG, the majority of the activists he met through his deployment were not that extreme. In a report on a discussion at a study class, HN 299 records an individual's assertion that unmasked police spies present in left-wing groups should get a, open quotes, good hiding, close quotes. He does not recall that such comments made him feel particularly threatened, and as he remembers, the report prompted no extra measures from SDS management to protect his welfare. While HN 299 believes he was trusted by group members, he recalls that they quite often urged others to be on the constant lookout for special branch spies. Unlike most of his SDS colleagues, HN 299 joined a trade union while undercover, the Transport and General Workers Union, to bolster his cover. He states that he attended some meetings, but probably did not report them because, open quotes, those meetings would be covered by an ordinary special branch officer, close quotes. HN 299 states that at meetings at the SDS Safe House, which took place 2 to 3 times a week, undercover officers would sometimes speak to managers about activist meetings they had been to in front of other officers. If involved in similar activities, officers might discuss group-related matters with one another, sometimes where managers were present. He recalls that the chief inspector or inspector of the SDS would usually come to Safe House meetings and would at times task officers to go to a particular meeting or demonstration. He also recalls very occasionally asking for and being provided with a special branch file about a person with whom he had come across while deployed. Occasionally at the safe flat, someone would cook a meal and the UCOs and managers would eat together. During his deployment, HN 299 would speak to the office daily to let managers know that he was okay. While he believes that management were conscious and aware of officers' welfare, HN 299 states that it was nonetheless incumbent on an officer to raise with the SDS office any serious welfare issues experienced while undercover. During his deployment, HN 299 recalls then Commissioner Sir Robert Mark visiting the SDS safe flat and saying something to the effect that, open quotes, "You realise that you could cause me tremendous problems under certain circumstances," close quotes. His deployment, which lasted approximately 240 weeks, ended in 1976. HN 299 gradually went to fewer meetings and then stopped attending entirely, telling people he was returning to Glasgow. His withdrawal strategy was planned and agreed with the SDS office. HN 299 does not recall witnessing any public disorder whilst deployed and states that he did not participate in any. He asserts that he witnessed no violence to people or property and was involved in none. He was not arrested, charged, or convicted of a criminal offence while serving undercover, and he did not appear in criminal proceedings as a witness. There is no evidence that he engaged in sexual activity while in his cover identity. That concludes the summary for this officer. In addition to the witness statement and documents for this officer, the inquiry is also publishing today documents in relation to HN 344, whose cover name was Ian Cameron, and who reported on the Anti-Internment League and the Northern Minorities Defence Force. And this analysis can be found at pages 90 to 92 of Counsel to the Inquiry's written opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now, I think, adjourn for approximately 10 minutes while arrangements are made to resume ordinary evidential hearings. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to join your breakout rooms, please. Time is now 10:20 a.m., so we shall resume at 10:30 a.m. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I will now hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. As at the beginning of every live evidential session, a recording made earlier is going to be played. If you're listening to it for the first time, please listen carefully. I am conducting this inquiry under a statute, the Inquiries Act 2005, which gives me the power to make orders regulating the conduct of the inquiry, including its hearings. In the exercise of that power, I have made a number of orders which affect what you may and may not do in the hearing rooms and after you leave them. Breach of any of the orders is a serious matter and may have serious consequences for you. If I am satisfied that a person may have breached an order, I have the power to certify the matter to the High Court, which will investigate and deal with it as if it had been a contempt of that court. If satisfied that a breach has occurred and merits the imposition of a penalty, the High Court may impose a severe sanction on the person in breach, including a fine, imprisonment for up to 2 years, and sequestration of their assets. Evidence is going to be given live over screens in the hearing rooms. It is strictly prohibited to photograph or record what is shown on the screens or to record what is said by a witness or anyone else in the hearing rooms. You may bring your mobile telephone into the hearing rooms, but you may not use it for any of those purposes. You may use it silently for any other purpose. In particular, you may transmit your account of what you have seen and heard in a hearing room to any other person, but only once at least 10 minutes have elapsed since the event which you are describing took place. This restriction has a purpose. In the course of the inquiry, I have made orders prohibiting the public disclosure of information, for example, about the identity of a person for a variety of reasons. These orders must be upheld. It is inevitable that whether by accident or design, information which I have ordered should not be publicly disclosed will sometimes be disclosed in a hearing. If and when that happens, I will immediately suspend the hearing and make an order prohibiting further disclosure of the information outside the hearing rooms. The consequence will be that no further disclosure of that information may be made by mobile telephone or other portable electronic device from within the hearing room or by any means outside it. I am sorry if you find this message alarming. It is not intended to be. Its purpose is simply to ensure that everyone knows the rules which must apply if I am to hear the evidence which I need to enable me to get to the truth about undercover policing. You, as members of the public, are entitled to hear the same public evidence as I will hear and to reach your own conclusions about it. The inquiry team will do their best to ensure that you can. If you have any doubt about the terms of this message or what you may or may not do, you should not hesitate to ask one of them, and with my help if necessary, they will provide you with the answer. Professor Rosenhead, can you hear me? Professor Rosenhead, can you hear me? It may be you are still on mute. If, like me, you find the use of these devices problematic to start with.
I'm there now.
You were on mute.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, yes. Hear me?
That is a mistake we all make repeatedly at the start of the use of these machines.
Sure. Yes.
You are about to give evidence. Do you wish to affirm or to swear an oath?
To affirm.
Then may you please be affirmed.
Right.
Mr. Fernandez.
Good morning, Professor Rosenhead. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
I understand that you would like to affirm.
Yes.
Thank you. Please repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Professor Rosenhead. Chairman?
Thank you. Ms. Hummerston.
Thank you, sir. Professor Rosenhead, your name appears in SDS reports relating to activities in particular of Stop the 70 tour. I'm going to ask you some questions about that. And in particular of the reports that have been attributed to 3 SDS officers, Mike Ferguson, HN135, Jill Mosdell, HN346, and Mike Scott, HN298. Before we begin, I just want to make it clear that the inquiry notes your concerns raised in your witness statement and your request for further information about special branch interest in your activities. Of course, this inquiry is confined to looking into the activities of the SDS rather than a wider inquiry into special branch as a whole. And so we're going to confine our interest in the SDS for today's purposes. With that said, can I just ask you a few sort of contextual questions about Stop the 70 tour, please? Is it right? It was formed in September 1969 with the short-term aim of stopping the British tour of the South African cricket team, which was due to commence in June of the following year. But the wider purpose was to isolate apartheid South Africa and ultimately to bring an end to apartheid in South Africa. Is that a sort of brief overview of the aims and purposes of the Stop the 70 tour?
Yes, that is correct. The sporting boycott was one of the mechanisms for bringing pressure to bear on South Africa, and one of the more effective ones. And it had already started, but STST racked it up a notch, I think.
They used the South African rugby team that was touring in 1969 to 1970 to promote their aims. Is that right? That by direct action at matches of the South African rugby touring team. Is that right?
Yes, the focus was on cricket, and only after a little while did we realize that there was a rugby tour about to come up, and therefore we should probably try and, as it were, develop our tactics under pressure during that.
And in fact, the tactics proved to be successful, because the invitation for the South African rugby team was in fact withdrawn very shortly before they were due to arrive in the UK. Is that right?
Yes.
South African cricket team, I think.
Sorry, cricket team. I'm terribly sorry.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes.
Dealing now, please, briefly with the generality of the activities that were undertaken by the Stop the 70 tour. The target of the activism was the rugby team. Is that right? That's what you said in your witness statement by the SDST. And they targeted rugby grounds, the hotels used by the rugby team, and other venues used by the team. Is that right?
Yes.
And also cricket grounds where matches were to be played by the visiting South African team in June 1970.
Yes, to a lesser extent, because the tour didn't take place, but there was some preparatory activity.
And the aim, you said in your witness statement, was to disrupt the activities of the team through what you have called non-violent direct action. Is that right?
Yes.
And by that, you mean it was not part of any plan by those that coordinated the activities of the Stop the 70 tour to use plan for a plan to use violence towards any person. And so it's not part of their plan for demonstrators themselves to be violent towards any person. Is that right?
I would put it more strongly. It wasn't just that it wasn't a part of our plan. It was a part of our plan that there should be no violence.
And you would use instead what you have called peaceful, civil, disobedient methods. By civil disobedience, you don't mean, do you, entirely non-criminal behaviour? It could include some criminal behaviour, for example, obstructing the highway, obstructing the police, matters of that nature.
This had already happened, of course, in quite a large scale in the Committee of 100 demonstrations in the early 60s. And we had the same philosophy of actually, in a sense, offering ourselves up as sacrifices to the law to demonstrate that there were things that we thought were outrageous. And this was one way we could do it. So there were breaches of minor criminal law, like obstructing the highway.
And the tactics were used to cause maximum inconvenience or to actively prevent matches taking place or players from going about their business. Is that right?
I wouldn't say maximal inconvenience. I think sufficient inconvenience for it to be noticed not only by the players and the management, but noticed by the public, because obviously we needed to get the British public to be aware that a team which was racially selected and representing an abhorrent regime was visiting the country. And it wasn't just that the people in the ground should know that people more generally should and be recruited to the cause.
And part of that, a way of publicising those aims was the organisation of mass demonstrations. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I think you say in your witness statement, the Stop the 70 tour attracted tens of thousands to their demonstrations.
Yes, and I don't remember the exact numbers, certainly tens, perhaps even hundreds of thousands in aggregate. I'm not sure what the biggest demonstration was. I think possibly it was in Dublin, in fact, when the rugby team went there. But there were certainly many thousands at a number of different demonstrations.
You have said there was no vetting in particular of participants in those demonstrations. Perhaps it follows that there couldn't be if there were tens of thousands of participants.
I think I need to say that although I see in the record that I attended all kinds of meetings that were taking decisions about the Stop the 70 tour as a whole, I don't really recall those meetings. I don't think I was central to the planning of those demonstrations at all, because by that stage I was more involved in what we call the Special Action Group.
We'll come on to that in a moment. I just want to sort of contextualise your activities.
Yes, I'm apologising for my lack of memory of those other meetings that were organising the public demonstrations.
Quite understood, Professor Rosenhead. It follows, though, doesn't it, if there are tens of thousands of participants in a march, nobody could be sure of the dispositions of the individual marchers.
There can be no vetting of, going back to the previous question, or people who are told that there is an event and they can turn up. I think we would have published our intentions that it should be entirely non-violent, and have done that in every way possible, presumably with stewards and leaflets and things like that. But there's no way you can control a lot of individuals. They will do their own thing. But on the whole, I think they did comply.
One of the other tactics used was that of pitch invasion. Is that right? Where
Yes.
Demonstrators could get onto the pitch to prevent, either to halt play or to prevent players from coming out onto the pitch. And I think you say in your witness statement that on one occasion you yourself invaded a pitch and were removed by the police, is that right?
Yes.
And I think you said removed by the police before the rugby players succumbed to the temptation to beat you up, is that right?
It was quite scary because I'm not very big and they were, and they looked very angry.
A match in a sizable stadium, like, for example, Twickenham, or a match like that could attract, couldn't it, tens of thousands of spectators. So if it was a popular match, the stands would be full of tens of thousands of people. Yes,
and the one that I got on the pitch for, I tried it several, but I'm not very good at climbing fences. So I did succeed in Aldershot, and the spectators there were very significantly drawn from the armed forces. So it was not just the people on the pitch who were a bit threatening, so were those in who were spectators.
And I think you make that clear in your witness statement, that the atmosphere or the threat of violence you felt came from the direction of the rugby supporters.
Yes.
But it's right to say, isn't it, that that sort of pitch invasion or that sort of disruption creates a potential, doesn't it, for public disorder on a rather large scale, if you've got a lot of people in the stands angry and upset about the disruption of their match. There's a potential for a form of public disorder.
I suppose that depends upon stewarding, really. I remember seeing the evidence that Ernest Rodker, whose evidence was read out yesterday, that by his son, that he was kicked by the spectators while being carried out. That didn't happen to me. The stewarding seemed to work okay. The police took us off the field to a room they had, and then they photographed us. By the way, those photographs should have been destroyed since we were charged with nothing. And it was only years later that somebody pointed out to me, I think it was in a local paper, that the police had held on to these. So that presumably the police were guilty of an offence, at least as serious as mine, perhaps more so because they're under some kind of duty to obey the law more than me.
Would it be fair to say that the potential for some form of public disorder contributed, at least in part, to the success of the campaign to withdraw the invitation for the South African cricket team? That it would be a matter that would be difficult to police and difficult to manage, and therefore the invitation was withdrawn?
You need to ask the government of the day, and of course most of those people are dead now. But the invitation was withdrawn at the very last minute, only about a week before the tours. My impression was that it was the escalating size of the demonstrations, which were peaceful, but were very, very large and getting bigger. I have the impression that was the main reason, that if this was happening with a rugby tour, rugby being a minority sport, and cricket coming down the road, and already there was a lot of disquiet about the exclusion of Basil d'Oliveira, a player of colour, who had been selected for the British Test team, and then the South Africans said they wouldn't have him. So there was a lot of animus already among the British population, not only cricket lovers, about the South African cricket. So that was expected to escalate, I think.
The activities of the Stop the 70 tour, is this right, depended on leaks regarding the itinerary of the touring rugby team? I think you say in your witness statement that Lord Peter Hain had a contact who would leak details of their itinerary, and so they would known where they were going to be at any given time, and then direct activities could be organised to coincide with their arrivals at various destinations. Is that right?
Yes, but to the best of my knowledge, that information was not used in any way to organise the big demonstrations. Those were only set pieces at the grounds, not it wasn't using any private information.
Right, thank you. Does it follow that some of the smaller episodes of direct action were activities arranged at the last minute? when the details of the itinerary were leaked?
I don't know how last minute we would do. I never actually saw the details of this. The information would get through. I was in this little subgroup called the Special Action Group, and we would receive that information. And I was never the one that received it. So I'm not quite sure when it was received, but generally we had enough time to, for example, on one occasion I went down to a hotel in Bristol where they were going to stay. And we knew about that long enough ahead of time to make a booking for a couple of us to book into rooms in the hotel and make other preparations. So it wasn't last minute, but it would, and we knew which hotel they were staying at in London, for example, quite well ahead.
Thank you. I just want to ask you about a document very briefly that doesn't appear in your the bundle of documents that have been sent to you. But please can we have on screen UCPI 0000034,318, please. This is a special branch report, so not an STS report, regarding an AGM of the Anti-Apartheid League from 1969. You haven't seen this document before, so it may be that you simply don't remember at all, but were you in the habit of attending, were you a member of the AAM, of the anti-apartheid movement?
Yes, in fact, in the year previous, I had for 1 year been on the executive committee of the anti-apartheid movement. And I think probably I left that in part because I got involved in Stop the 70s tour, which seemed to me a more effective way of pursuing our aims.
Thank you.
I think it's quite likely that I was at that AGM.
I think later on there's mention of your name, and so it does look as if you were there, but I just wanted to make sure whether you to sort of focus you on the document a moment. So can we turn on to page 2 of this document, please? And there's some paragraphs in the middle that are headed "Stop the 70 Tour." If you can just scroll up slightly, thank you very much. Just leave it there. The document reads as follows: dealing with the anti-apartheid movement's activities in sport, Mr. Paul Hodges spoke of the formation of the Stop the 70 Tour and said that detailed plans had already been made to harass the Springboks rugby tour that was due to start at Oxford on November the 5th. He said he appreciated that the anti-apartheid movement could not be linked officially with the protesters because of the possibility of its leaders being charged with conspiracy to commit public disorder. Just pausing very briefly there, this document reports a meeting that took place on the 26th of October 1969. It appears that plans had already been made to, as it says, harass the Springboks rugby tour. Were you aware of those plans? Would you have been privy to those plans as part of the Stop the 70 tour?
What was the date of this meeting?
26th of October 1969.
I can't remember when there was the first national conference to Stop the 70s tour, which must have been very much around that time. Clearly it already existed. And since I know that I went to the first national conference, I'm assuming that the information was public. I'm not sure what question is.
Thank you. The paragraph goes on to say, later on in that paragraph, that the anti-apartheid movement could not be linked officially with the protesters because of the possibility of its leaders being charged with conspiracy to commit public disorder. Is this right, then anticipating criminal offences being committed during the course of the direct action that was being planned for the rugby matches, is that right?
First of all, I don't know who Mr. Paul Hodges was. Do you have any information on that? Who was he speaking for? Was he speaking for the Stop the 70s tour or for the anti-apartheid movement? It's not clear.
It seems he was a member of the anti-apartheid movement.
Yes. There was a general perception, I think, that the anti-apartheid movement, while playing a very valuable role, was somewhat restricted and played a particular kind of pressure group role in British politics, which was very effective, but also had its limitations. And the Stop the 70s tour was formed out of some sense of dissatisfaction that the anti-apartheid movement wasn't being sufficiently militant. And I think throughout this whole period of several months, there was a tension between the two organizations in which the anti-apartheid movement was often distancing itself from the Stop the 70s tour, while at the same time, I think, benefiting from it because it kept the issue in the public eye and also made the anti-apartheid movement seem relatively moderate. So there was an interesting dynamic going on there. But I don't think that Stop the 70 tour felt it was being encouraged or supported by anti-apartheid.
Thank you. Can we just turn on to page 3 very briefly, please? Right at the top of the page, thank you very much. The second paragraph down, of the 74 who attended the meeting, it was obvious that the following were the core of the coming protest movement. And you'll notice the names there, Ms. Christabel Gurney, and then your name appears next to Mr. Peter Hain.
Yeah.
How does that assessment strike you? Would you have agreed with that assessment that you were the core of the coming protest movement?
I'm quite surprised. I've seen my name at the top of, or near the top of various lists that the police collected, and I wasn't aware that I was particularly central. There wasn't much of an organization. I suspect I must have spoken, and maybe volubly, I don't know, but therefore having said something about it and supported it, maybe they thought I must be leading something, but I think it was a very informal grouping, and probably people came together after events such as the AGM of the anti-apartheid movement to think about how we could take this idea forward. It was an idea that grew. It wasn't something that was already pre-formed at the beginning of this period.
Thank you very much. You can take that document now, down now. Thank you very much. Can I now just ask you briefly about some context about the special action group that was the group that you say you were involved with? This, you say in your witness statement, was a subgroup of the Stop the 70 tour, is that right?
Yes.
And you said there was some overlap between that group and the central direction of the Stop the 70 tour.
Yeah.
Do you mean by that you had the same broad aims?
Absolutely, yes. It was in a sense, just as the anti-apartheid movement could benefit from Stop the 70s tour, but while there being no establishable connection between them. In the same way, I think Stop the 70s tour could benefit from what the Special Action Group did, while it was entirely deniable that we were acting because, as it were, under instruction. We were autonomous. We received information. We decided what we wanted to do, but because we were in sympathy with the general aim to Stop the 70s tour, there was never any tension.
And you say in your witness statement, the Special Action Group had no public profile, didn't advertise its existence or claim responsibility for any action. And as a result, the Stop the 70 tour didn't need to own those actions either. Were you a sort of covert arm of the Stop the 70 tour? Is that the effect of it?
Well, the covert makes it all sound a bit suspicious. A bunch of very nice, well-intentioned people who thought that to achieve their aims, they needed the element of surprise. So you had to be a little bit quiet about it. And we did take some precautions about trying not to phone, because we assumed that if the special branch knew about us, they would very likely be bugging our telephones. So things like that.
What was the purpose of, why was it that you needed to have a smaller group that the Stop the 70 tour didn't need to claim responsibility for? What was the purpose of that?
Well, I imagine that in terms of not claiming responsibility, the objective was to get very large numbers of people to these demonstrations, and some people would have not wished to be associated with people doing sort of almost undergraduate pranks. You know, we did nothing more serious than that. You know, one member went into, I think, a hotel room somewhere, not in London, somewhere outside, gained access and sprayed anti-apartheid messages in shaving cream on the mirrors in the players' bedrooms to show that they'd been there. It was a sort of disquieting tactic. So we would do things like that, but it's not very dignified, and it didn't really fit very well with the serious image of Stop the 70s tour.
So it undermined the sort of gravitas of the message. Is that?
I think so. Yes. You know, we did stuff that, while there was nothing wrong with it, indeed, I would say that it was entirely appropriate. It didn't fit with what Stop the 70 tour, how it wanted to be seen.
Thank you. You also operated the policy of non-violent direct action and civil disobedience, is that right?
Yes.
Although that included rather more specific and targeted activities such as painting slogans and gluing locks and getting access to hotels that the teams were staying at, is that right?
Yes.
And your membership was rather more controlled because you were all known to one another, is that right?
I think controlled is the wrong word. That it was a sort of informal network, that, and I really don't know how it grew. I mean, I knew Ernest Rodker socially previously, but I think we actually, and then having known each other, we met in the context of anti-apartheid, so it was natural we would talk about things there. But I don't know how other people came to be involved. But it had no formal membership. It's people at a meeting would know about the next meeting. Presumably we had phone numbers, and if anybody was absent, we told them when we were getting together again. I don't think meetings were that frequent because this all happened in just a very few months.
Yes. With that context in mind, can we look, please, at the document which is the first national conference of the Stop the 70 tour? This is UCPI 000008660, and it's behind tab 15, sir, for the hard copy bundle. This is, have I got the right document? Wait a minute. Sorry. Yes, a slightly blurry document, attended by a number of people, and later on we'll have a look at it, but you, Christopher Gurney and Lord Peter Hayne are all referenced in the document. It seems to have taken the, there was a morning session and an afternoon session. We can see the underlying type there, morning session, afternoon session. The morning session open to the public as well as delegates, and the afternoon session open to delegates only. Can we look, please, at paragraph 5 of this document, which is on the second page? Can we just make that a bit larger? Thank you very much. Michael Brierley, phonetic, a Northern University lecturer and Middlesex cricketer, gave a well-reasoned speech in which he warned delegates against the use of violence for violence sake in their demonstration. He spoke for the moderate within the Stop the 70 tour, who were against all forms of violence. Unfortunately, neither Brierley nor any of the other speakers could satisfactorily define violence, which complicated the arguments for and against it. Professor Rosenhead, does that paragraph indicate that not all the participants in the national conference were entirely ad idem on the issue of the use of violence during the course of Stop the 70 tour demonstrations?
I think based on that paragraph and on other documents, I think it would be unwise to take these reports as a neutral and objective statement of what was going on in the meeting. I think there's an element of self-justification here for police involvement. There was, I am, the possibility I'm rewriting it with hindsight, but I'm pretty sure that I sensed no movement towards violence. The whole point of Stop the 70s tour was that it needed to bring public opinion along, and violence would have the opposite effect. And I don't recall at any stage, not just at this conference, but at any other, anyone advocating violence.
Can we look now, please, at paragraph 8? It's on the same theme, and I just want to invite your comment on it. It's on page 3, please. Thank you very much. During the general discussion which followed, it became apparent that the only real ground for disagreement amongst the delegates was on the questions of whether or not violence should be used at the demonstrations which would take place during the cricket season, and indeed what constituted violence. Some felt that violence could only be used against the person, but others felt that property came within the definition, and also the threat of violence at a later date was in itself a violent demonstration. Despite this difference, it was stressed that the Stop the 70 tour was not a monolithic organization, and its avowed policy was one of non-violent militant direct action. If individuals or individual groups felt that violence was called for, then they must be the final judges of what action was appropriate. And that concluded the morning session. Professor Rosenhead, is this right? That indicates that whilst the sort of publicly stated case for the Stop the 70 tour was one of non-violence. In fact, what was being sort of communicated at the meeting was that each person must take their own course, and whilst the Stop the 70 tour wouldn't condone any violence, if people felt violence was appropriate, that was up to them. Does that sound a fair assessment?
Absolutely not. No, I think this is self-serving nonsense, to be honest. I think this is somebody writing up in a report. I can only think, writing down what he thinks his superiors would like to hear and use as justification. There was absolutely no sense that everybody could, it was a smorgasbord where everybody could do what they wanted. Stop the 70 tour was absolutely clear that anyone who took part needed to be non-violent. And if it's possible that at this meeting, a person or two may have said that they disagreed with this, but there was no take-up, and I don't believe that to be the case, but if it was, there was certainly no take-up and no sense that this was a strand which needed to be reported about in one of the longer paragraphs.
Thank you, Professor Rosenhead. Can we just briefly look now, please, at paragraph 7? It's on the same page. It's just if you just scroll up slightly, please. In fact, it's a paragraph that begins over the other page, and it's it comes from a speech to the morning session by Peter Hain. But the paragraph I want to just, part of it I just want to just look at, it is on the top of the 3rd page, please, where Peter Hain says the support which had been gained in such a short time should not be allowed to dissipate at the end of the Springboks tour. From attacking apartheid in sport, they must move into the wider field of racism both in South Africa and in this country, and finally the capitalist system which nurtured it. An attack on the capitalist system which nurtured racism in this country and in South Africa, was that something that that you contemplated and something that others agreed with at that meeting? Can you recall?
I think that would have resonated, yes. Clearly, I mean, I used to watch Lancashire play cricket in Liverpool, which was my hometown, but I wasn't exactly a major cricket fan, and that had been some time previously. I guess that some people who were involved in this cared about sport very deeply, but I think we would all care about politics and racism in politics much more so. So it was not about stopping at all from happening. It was about putting pressure on the regime in South Africa to change. And in the end, of course, through international ramifications and sanctions and so on, that became what happened. I think you also have to recall the very substantial links between London as a centre of capitalist finance and South Africa. There were major campaigns going on about that. Barclays Bank was the subject of a campaign for, I would have thought, more than a decade. I don't know quite how long it went on, supported by the National Union of Students and all sorts of others, but because of its complicity at that period in the apartheid regime. And it was one of perhaps the largest bank operating in South Africa. But there was also all kinds of finance capital that was supporting the continuation of the existing system. So there was seen as collaboration between basically fascist regime in South Africa and the capitalist system which we were part of.
Is that what you think? Is that how you would interpret the expression "the capitalist systems which nurtured it," an attack on banking regimes that funded Southern African minority white rule? Is that how you're interpreting that expression?
Well, this is a speech by Peter Hain, who was then in the Young Liberals, and he afterwards migrated to the Labour Party. He was, Peter will speak for himself, no doubt, tomorrow, but he was by no means an extreme leftist in the Labour Party. I would say centrist. I had great respect for what he did there, but I think it's unlikely that he's talking about root and branch revolution. I don't think that was his bag.
Thank you. Now, paragraph 10, please, towards the bottom of this page. I'm just going to finish off with this document, and then we're going to have a short break, Professor Rosenhead, because it's near the time to have our break. Paragraph 10, this is a paragraph which deals with the future plans of the Stop the 70 tour. And at 1, a welcome should be extended to the white South African cricket team when they arrive, welcome in inverted commas, if this was at all possible to arrange. A TU spokesman, something that's been redacted for privacy reasons, of SOGAT, said he would endeavour to arrange for everything connected with the tour to be blacked, which was considered an appropriate form of action, and this would commence at the airport itself. What does that mean? What did he mean by blacked?
Well, trade unions were much more, had much bigger membership and more heft, if you like, in those days than they do now, where they've been reduced by anti-trade union legislation, etc. I'm trying to remember what branch SOGAT organized. Does anybody, do you know?
With print.
Print, yes. So they couldn't actually interfere with the workings of Heathrow Airport, and therefore I assume what they're talking about is trade union solidarity, that they would call on other unions to behave in that way. In the event, of course, it didn't happen, so perhaps he was slightly, he or she, I imagine he, was overstating their ability to have things blacked. Means that that you don't cross a picket line, that sort of arrangement, that if one union is taking action, others don't violate their picket line.
Thank you. Over the page, please, page 4, and then the small paragraph at the top of the page. A national demonstration should be held at Lord's on Saturday, June the 6th, 1970, the opening day of the tour, and it should be of such proportions that it should effectively finish the tour. Does that mean it was anticipated that it would be such a large demonstration that the cricket team would simply give up and go home, because the possibility of playing another match when confronted with that sheer waste of numbers would be entirely pointless?
I'm not sure what this is, who is supposed to have said this.
These are simply the plans that have been put in place by the Stop the 70 tour for action in the future for the forthcoming summer.
And who said that? I just don't get the authority for it.
These were group discussions held by various parts of the Stop the 70 tour in group discussions during the course of the conference, during the delegates call. It
sounds like this is one of the bright ideas that was performed in a breakout group, which, as we call it now, it doesn't mean it was necessarily bought into by everybody, but that's the way it works. The ideas you generated are then fed in and not necessarily accepted or rejected, but are there as a resource. I think it's quite a strong aspiration. Maybe it could have worked. It didn't have to, because the government pulled the plug. And I think the government pulled the plug because of worries about what would happen in terms of the scale of demonstrations if they didn't. So I think in a sense, the statement is true, because the thought of such demonstrations was probably sufficient to get the tour cancelled. Whether, had it gone ahead, how it would have played out, we don't know. But certainly, if there had been many tens of thousands of people surrounding Lord's and bringing traffic to a stop and stopping the match from going ahead, I think that would have provoked a crisis, certainly. But whether that would have happened, I don't know.
And perhaps the third idea that was mooted during these breakout groups, which is set out there, plays into that. As a preliminary to the mass demonstration, it was felt that the local demonstration should be held outside all the grounds where the South Africans would be playing at the earliest possible date after the beginning of the cricket season. These demonstrations should take the form of propaganda exercise consisting of leafleting and picketing the grounds. The leaflet should contain a warning that if the South Africans played at the grounds, then the matches would be disrupted, and the dates of these demonstrations will be decided later. That's all about the propaganda, is it, of this potential mass demonstration should the tour come to fruition?
It's a combination, I suspect, inferring from, I don't remember this idea or necessarily the meeting in which it took place, but it's building support. This is a form of advertisement. You go to the grounds where the games will be played, therefore people who are interested in cricket will be going to those grounds, and it's a possibility of informing them that what may happen. They may be recruited to it. They may use their influence to say, look, this is serious. We don't want this to happen. Can't we get the tour stopped? There could be a number of things that could happen from getting the word around.
Thank you. I think that's probably a convenient moment, sir.
Yes, before we break, could you clear up two minor matters for me, please? Can I take it that the Michael Brearley referred to there is the man who went on to become the captain of the England cricket team?
Yes.
And the special action group of which you speak, is that the same as the direct action group spoken of by Mr. Rodker?
I don't know the name direct action group, but there was only one, so maybe different terminologies were used.
Thank you. We will now break, I think, for 15 minutes, let shorthand writers have a break, and you as well. We'll be back in 15 minutes time. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms, please. The time is 11:20 a.m., so we shall reconvene at 11:35 a.m. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I will now hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Hummerston.
Thank you, sir. Professor Rosenhead, I want you to look at another document now, please. This one is UCPI 00000014399. And that's at tab 3, sir, in the hard copy bundle. This is a London region conference of the Stop the 70 tour held on the 5th of April, 1970. 50 delegates present, the chairman, Ernest Rodker. In paragraph 4, somebody whose name has been redacted for privacy reasons spoke about the, sorry, if you can scroll down, please. Paragraph 4 on that page, thank you. A little bit further. Thank you very much. Spoke about the subject of apartheid and expressed the hope that those present would not be disappointed if the coloured population seemed somewhat wayward in supporting the campaign. He said it was due to 2 factors. Firstly, that many coloured people felt cricket did not really affect them, and second, that for various reasons it was very hard to mobilise them in any great numbers. He concluded by saying that the Stop the 70 tour was a small organisation, but with a hard core of militants who could help to destroy apartheid and racialism. The expression used there, a hard core of militants, does that strike you as a fair or accurate assessment of the Stop the 70 tour, a small organisation with a hard core of militants?
First of all, I'm just curious as to who was saying this. It says privacy, so this is presumably is not an undercover cop speaking, so I'm not quite clear why the name has been removed. It would help to understand whether we should, what weight we should give to the views expressed here. Can anybody provide any clarification on in what role this person was speaking?
A number of names of private citizens have been removed to protect their privacy. That's why that name has been redacted. And no, that's right. It's not an undercover police officer speaking.
Could we just scroll up a bit so I can see under which item of the agenda this is coming? Because that might give me a clue as to whether this was.
Go up to paragraph 3, please.
So which part of the agenda is this?
It appears to be the beginning of the agenda. The agenda was somebody who was taking over from somebody else who'd been indisposed, apartheid in sport and racialism in Great Britain. It appears to be under that item of the agenda.
It's hard to know. Sometimes people do make speeches which represent their own views. But obviously, it sounds as if he was he or she was an invited speaker. And presumably representing views from outside the organization. Doesn't mean he or she got it wrong. I think the language is perhaps redolent of certain militancy of the day. I think if you say, instead of said hardcore, you said small number of committed individuals. I think that would be true. But to call them a hardcore, there was no party line. I mean, I was not in any organization with any of the other people who were that I was working with, other than Stop the 70s tour. So the idea of militants is normally nowadays seen as a group with a line that it's trying to push on everybody else, and this is simply not a good description. Stop the 70s tour was a nice, floppy, liberal kind of organization, which many people could join who had maybe different activities outside, but agreed on this one thing. So I don't think that's the normal sense of hardcore and militants. I think if you wanted to say there was a a loose penumbra of feelings that South Africa was really so unpleasant that many people who had different views on other things would agree on South Africa, and that some people were more committed to that than others, and particularly, of course, in the anti-apartheid movement. A lot of those would be exiled South Africans. We were mostly not, and stopped them until we were mostly born and bred Brits rather than emigres. And I guess South Africans might have been a little bit more committed because it was their home that we were talking about. Whereas for me, it was an option. This was if you like, this is an expression of my values. It wasn't that my life was on the line. And I think that might be true of many others. So hardcore militance doesn't sound right at all.
Thank you.
I can't comment on the extent to which what is described there as coloured people, because that was the language of the day. I can't say whether that was accurate or not. Of course.
No, I'm not asking you to comment on that. Thank you. Can we move on, please, to page 2? I want to look at paragraph 6. It was agreed that in view of the possibility of conspiracy charges arising from any activity which could be construed as urging others to disrupt public events, it would be wiser not to discuss detailed activities at this stage, but that a planning committee should be set up which could advise branches on tactics which might prove successful in disrupting cricket pitches. The planning committee would consist of a small group of known, trusted delegates and could meet at a convenient date in the near future. Is that a reference, do you think, to your group, the Special Action Group there, or is that something different?
I have no recollection of this, but it does seem that that could have been what the germ of the idea which grew into the Special Action Group. What was the date of this document?
The document is dated the 7th of April and reflects a meeting on the 5th of April 1970.
Well, the Special Action Group had been in existence for quite some time before that.
Right.
So I don't think that can be it. That may have been that must be some other activity.
Right, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Can we can take that document down now, please? Can we now look at document UCPI 000008607? That's tab 9 of the hard copy bundle, sir. This is a meeting which took place on the 7th of May 1970, so not very long after that previous meeting. And it's a meeting of the Special Planning Group of the Stop the 70 tour, held in a room at the London School of Economics, attended by 9 people. In paragraph 3, the purpose of the Special Planning Groups is said to be to suggest, coordinate and implement activities within the London area from the time of the arrival of the South African cricket team until their departure. I think in your witness statement, you query whether that in fact was a meeting of the Special Action Group. Is that right?
I find this, is there a list of who attended at the end? Because that would help to clarify that point.
There is, but they have been redacted for privacy reasons, and only your name appears, I'm afraid, Professor Rosenhead. But there were only 9 people in attendance, including yourself.
I would say first, just in passing, that S108 was my own room at LSE. It was a lecturer's room. it was a small lecturer's room. It's very, very thin and not very long. How on earth there were 9 people there? I think this policeman has invented that. How could there be 9 people in that room? It's hard to get 4 in. But so I don't know. Also, if there are redactions, it suggested it wasn't the special planning group, because then there would be other names there which are subject matter of this inquiry. And if those names were not there, how can it have been the special planning group? Why is Ernest's name not there? Why is Mike Kraft's name not there? And so on. I find it hard to know what this was, this meeting. Is there any evidence further down that would help us to tell?
Can we, yes, we're going to move down the report. Can we look at paragraph 3, please? Well, first of all, just briefly going back to this, in fact, 2 paragraph 3s in this document. Can you just scroll up slightly? And so that we can see that what the points of discussion were likely to be during this planning group. This group, therefore, had at this stage broad discussions on the following points: Heathrow demonstration tickets, demonstrations outside Lord's on June the 6th, which is the first day of the cricket tour, and hotel demonstrations. And now just scroll up slightly so we can see the bottom of that, see the whole of that paragraph 3. At this stage, no definite plans have been made for a demonstration at Heathrow, mainly because of a lack of information about the time and place of arrival of the teams. However, the general assumption was that they would arrive at 8 AM on June the 1st by a scheduled BOAC flight at Heathrow. To this, and members of the planning group agreed that a recce would be made of the airport with particular reference to the exits therefrom. It was generally felt that it would be impossible to prevent the team from leaving the airport, but that incidents could well be staged en route from the airport to their hotel. Does this sound like the sort of thing that your special action group would have discussed?
No.
Direct action targeted at the rugby team, at the cricket team.
This is clearly much more public, not in any way clandestine at all. And the reference there to the planning group suggests it could have been the group that was mentioned
in the previous
to have in the last document that you had up. So I guess I must have been a member of it, but of course it didn't last very long because the tour got cancelled and none of this was required. So I have no recollection of it. And presumably the other people whose names have been redacted were on the planning group, but not on the special action group. So I think this might be an entirely different activity.
Thank you. The reference to incidents being staged en route. So it says the incidents could be staged en route from the airport to their hotel. What sort of incidents might have been contemplated by the special planning group?
Well, as I said, this wasn't the special planning group as far as I can tell, and I have no idea what that could have been. But certainly, if there were incidents to be carried out, then you'd have thought it would need to be rather carefully organised, whatever they were. I imagine there could have been some kind of traffic interruption, but it's hardly likely. I can't think what else it would be, but you could hardly do this thing in an open public meeting and plan how you're going to block a road or something. And certainly we did not do that in the special planning group. It was never the special action group, what do you want to call it. It was never something that I recall even being on the agenda, let alone agreed to.
Right. Can we turn on, please, to page 2 in this document and look at paragraph 5? Thank you. Somebody whose name has been redacted for privacy reasons presented plans and aerial photographs of Lords and described the defences as they existed at present. He said that there would probably be 2 points of attack open to demonstrators. First, the raised stand, believed G and E stands, where there was a drop of approximately 5 feet to the ground. And as there were no barbed wire or other obstructions at this stage, it seemed the most likely place from which to launch an attack. And B, from the gates opposite the pavilion from where, I can't really understand that word, etc. were brought to the ground. Therefore,
I think.
rollers, etc. were brought to the ground. I'm grateful. Therefore, bearing these two places in mind, demonstrators should be advised to purchase tickets for these areas. The expression used there, from which to launch an attack, what can you recall what might have been meant by that? What attack would be launched?
This is like the hyperbolic language elsewhere. It's not a language you would ever have used. You know, I've referred to it. I think this is a person writing. This is, again, presumably a covert report we're seeing here, not a public document. And whoever's writing it can do that with the certainty that it will not be refuted or adjusted. And the terms seem to be directed to make this seem more serious than I think it can have been. This section of it does look more like the sort of thing the Special Action Group might have got involved with. So maybe this was some kind of hybrid. It was both planning demonstrations and the purchase of tickets and so on, which would be a mainstream STST activity. We didn't have any money, and we didn't have no mechanisms for acquiring tickets or distributing them to other people. So there seems to be an odd mixture of things going on here. Assuming this meeting took place, I don't imagine that meetings were invented, but I think the way it's described seems to me implausible that we would have done. I can remember odd meetings where we talked about what we might do at the beginning of the cricket season if it happened, and they weren't planning picture invasions because that's not what we did. We didn't mobilize large numbers of people. What we did was done with a very small number of people, sometimes one or two, sometimes six. You know, I don't remember, but certainly we would not organize anything that involved large numbers of people. The ideas we had for cricket grounds were things like, could we find somebody who could fly a model aeroplane over the cricket ground with a streamer with an anti-apartheid message? It was that sort of thing, not things involving large bodies of people. So whatever this meeting was about, it wasn't Special Planning Group, and I think it's been souped up for the eyes and ears of the senior officers in terms of language.
Thank you. Can we scroll towards the bottom of the page, please? Thank you. That's great. Thank you. I just want to ask you about these series of points. In view of the different groups and organisations which will be present on June the 6th, it was difficult to make specific plans for any one type of action on the ground, but the following points were felt to be relevant. A mass attack on the ground was desirable, but this should be delayed until near the lunch interval. Before and after this, demonstrators should endeavour to get onto the pitch in 2s and 3s, and once having reached the playing area, the best advice was that each should do their own thing. General distraction should be mounted throughout the period of play in the form of shouting and moving about, so as to distract the players' attention as far as possible. Newspapers should be brought in and allowed to blow over the pitch wherever possible. The possibility of using balloons was discussed, but it was felt that they were not very effective. The use of fireworks, flares, and other material of a similar nature was advocated. It was said that Blacks, I believe Black and Edgington Limited, 22 Gray's Inn Road, apparently stock a mini flare used by climbers and others as a form of distress signal, which has a small launcher attachment, little bigger than a fountain pen, and could therefore be easily smuggled into the ground. And if you just, please, can you scroll down to the next page, page 3, just the top of that page. Just to finish that paragraph. Somebody whose name has been redacted for privacy reasons said that he was endeavouring to obtain the key to a school army training unit in order that he could make use of its store of thunder flashes. Can you just return to the previous page, please? And little paragraph A. The advice that people should endeavour to get to the pitch in 2s and 3s, and once they're do their own thing. What can you remember what might have been meant by that, by the expression "do their own thing"?
Where was this meeting taking place?
It took place on the 7th of May 1970 at the LSE, and is said to be a meeting of the special planning group of the
It's supposed to be in my room or not?
It was in room S108.
That was my room. I imagine that that's not invented. And I was there. I have no recollection of it. It's a different order of planning than we would normally have been involved with. So what was the specific question?
Can you recall what might have been meant by the advice that that demonstrators on reaching the pitch in 2s and 3s should do their own thing?
Well, the one time that I got onto the pitch and there was nothing to do. I just had to wait there until somebody came and removed me. And I imagine what I'm saying, there is no action to take once you're there. You might, I suppose, try to elude the police so as to make the interruption longer. I didn't. I just waited to be taken away. And I imagine that's what they mean. There was no specific action. Rather than that, that's code for do some terrible things.
The points, the advice under D, the use of fireworks, flares, and the possible use of thunder flashes. What was the purpose of using fireworks and flares and other sort of?
Well, notice it says was advocated. That means somebody brought forward this bright idea. It doesn't really mean that we decided to do it. And I think that was probably somebody who's a little bit more adventurous than most of us would have been happy with. I can't say now because, as I say, I have no recollection of the meeting. But people were casting around for things to do that might interfere with the games. I remember there was one scheme. We actually had a meeting in the flat of a sympathiser, which I don't know that it's reported on. It was a flat that actually overlooked Lords, and we were thinking about, would it be possible to have a high-pressure hose that could sort of somehow project a parabolic arc of liquid onto the pitch from over the stands and so on. So there were all kinds of crazy ideas going on, which never went anywhere, as the model aeroplane never went anywhere either. And I think this is probably just one of those brainstorming ideas that that's what you do with a brainstorm. You try and get ideas out, and some may get implemented, some may not. It doesn't look as if this one had any take-up, but in any case, as we know, the opportunity to use these ideas was removed from us by HM government, who stopped the talk.
Yes.
The talk stopped, shall we say.
And the use of fireworks or thunder flashes or whatever they're, however they're referred to, presumably their use would be to create anxiety and amongst the public watching, who wouldn't necessarily know how to attribute the noises that they were hearing. Would that be right?
I don't think that idea was ever accepted, and had it got near to implementation, we would have had to think seriously about those aspects, but it didn't. So this was just an idea lying on the table, and it wasn't immediately negated because it looked like we were thinking about all sorts of ideas, trying to think of things that we could do that would be effective, but none of these things were decided on.
We can take that document down now, please. And the next document I want to look at is MPS-0736368, which is behind tab 1 of the hard copy bundle for your notes, sir. This is another meeting of the special planning group held on the 13th of May, this time just a little later than the previous one. Again, 9 people appear to have been present. The points of discussion are the Heathrow demonstration, the hotel demonstrations, the June demonstrations when the tour was actually underway, and future activities. If we scroll down, please, slightly down the page so that we can look at the whole of paragraph 4, please. Thank you very much. The start part of that paragraph says that the demonstrations at the airport couldn't be finalized because no one knew quite when the South Africans would have arrived. But the second paragraph says the airport has been surveyed and photographs taken. And the general conclusion is that the flight will arrive at number 3 building and the South Africans will be spirited away through a VIP lounge into a waiting coach and thence to their hotel. If advance information is received that they are actually in transit, then an advance warning system to demonstrators will be put into operation to get them to assemble at the airport. It is considered feasible that a commando group of some 20 demonstrators could gain access to the area where passengers from the plane disembark to throw fireworks, etc., thus giving the South Africans a rousing welcome. Again, the reference to the use of fireworks, but this time at the airport. Again, would the purpose of using fireworks at the airport be to create panic amongst those people arriving and other users of the airport at that time?
Well, first of all, discounting the hyperbolic language, which whoever this is, it seems like the same person is using. I think these were ideas that had not been accepted. There are ideas that were floating around. We were nowhere near implementing any of these things. Fireworks weren't bought. There were no names. It's not an operational thing. This is, if you like, some thoughts being put out. Demonstrators could be stationed in the car park. There's nothing definite here. This is thoughts about how one might go ahead with something that was going to take place in the following month, surrounded by uncertainty. Almost certainly, very little of this would have been put into action, and it had not been accepted that we were going to go through the airport throwing fireworks. I'm assuming that I was there because it's my room, and that some discussion of fireworks was in place.
Yeah, your name appears at the end of the report as somebody who was in attendance.
Yes, that's what I thought. By the way, I noticed that at the beginning it says from a reliable and delicate source. Now I know this is code, police code. Can somebody tell me what that means?
It's the way that the reports begin in this era. That's how intelligence reports are written in this era, Professor.
I don't think all of them have that, but maybe I'm wrong. I thought that sometimes it meant that it was an undercover policeman, and in other formal words meant it was somebody who was a member of the organization but was supplying information. Is that not right?
I simply don't know, Professor, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah, can we...
Sorry, I'm not sure I answered your question entirely.
But
the idea of a commando group, none of us would have used that language. We weren't militaristic. You know, this is being translated into a kind of jargon for something which was disorganized, fluid, people interacting with each other. It wasn't a board of directors with people taking instructions or coming to conclusions. It was thinking about what we might do in preparation for what might happen later, perhaps.
Can we turn over onto the second page, please? And look at the top paragraph, paragraph 5. as had been agreed, each of the London groups will be given a specific date and time when they're expected to picket outside the team's hotel. It was suggested that once the hotel was known, individuals from each group should familiarise themselves with its layout and thus be in a position to gain access wherever possible or necessary, whenever possible or necessary. It was also suggested that although there would undoubtedly be police guards at the various entrances and exits, there would perhaps be times when this guard could be relaxed. And if there were a sufficient number of demonstrators present, then that would be the time to march boldly into the hotel and stage some sort of happening. The most spectacular would be the release of smoke bombs in the foyer or near the South Africans if they could be located. This is evidently a suggestion made by a member of this 9-group special planning group. Again, a reference to a smoke bomb. Is that in order to create sort of maximum anxiety and worry amongst the South African team and other members of the people using the hotel?
This is quite, assuming this is accurate, roughly, this is clearly wishful thinking by one person, sort of brainstorming some ideal scenario that they hope they might get a chance to implement. None of this could conceivably have happened, and I'm sure none of us were taking this at all seriously. Yeah, I mean, it's you can't take the things that are said at a meeting as a commitment of even those other people at the meeting, unless it says that was decided. And this obviously a policeman or policeman's agent or whoever it was that was the reliable and delicate source would have been looking for things like this to report, regardless of whether they were agreed on or not. And it's quite clear that no steps were taken to implement these, unless you can find me other evidence that that was the case. I have to say, I'm going entirely from the documents, not from memory. My memory is limited to the sorts of people who were there, the sorts of status of the organization of discussions, that it was not a dedicated cell. It was people, there would have been different people at each meeting and so on. It was not, I'm afraid we weren't that disciplined.
Just completing our look at this report, in paragraph 6, it says, apart from the obvious forms of demonstration already discussed at length, the following additional points have arisen. A meteorological balloon is to be purchased, also a cylinder of hydrogen with the intention of releasing ticker tape or similar substances overloads during the match. And a free radio expert, not identified, has stated that it should be possible to jam police communications at crucial period. It was stated that he has the equipment which is necessary for this and is prepared to assist. Can you remember that suggestion being made?
No, it's the whole thing is littered with wishful thinking and wild speculations, and I don't have any recollection. The fact that it didn't register suggests that it was never taken forward in any way, or possibly, given that it's doesn't fit with my general politics and my state of mind. I think I probably dismissed it as bluster, and as it, well, we don't know because we didn't get to the state of the cricket tour, but my doubt is that any of this would have happened, and we would have stuck to stuff that we'd been doing already, which was like mass demonstrations and occasional little forays of 1 or 2 people to try and add a little bit of extra spice to the source.
Right. Thank you. I think we can take that document down now, please. Can we now look, please, at UCPI 000008635 behind tab 4 in the hard copy bundle, please. Now, this is a meeting of the National Committee of the Stop the 70 tour at which you were present, which took place on the 24th of May 1970, so just after the time that the invitation extended to the South African cricket team had been withdrawn. And so the campaign had been successful. And I just want to ask you a couple of questions about it, please. Paragraph 1.2, I think. There was a, make sure I've just got the right document. Sorry, yes. It was agreed that they participate in the Ruskin Kitson March over the weekend, but that STST should not meet at Lord's as Rage, but in Regent's Park. If you can just scroll up a little bit, please. Thank you. The June the 6th rally, which was being organised by the anti-apartheid movement, was going on as planned. But the general feeling of those present was that the rally would be somewhat of an anticlimax, and that most Stop the 70 Tour supporters would not be particularly interested in participating under no circumstances should the Stop the 70 Tour use it as a victory rally. Does that indicate that the march was likely to be a great deal smaller than had been anticipated?
I think it says so in terms.
The purpose of the Stop the 70 Tour had been achieved.
But the rally was not the Stop the 70 Tours rally, as I understand it. It was the anti-apartheid movement. And the only question was whether STST should participate and in what way.
Thank you. Finally, this paragraph 3, if you can just scroll down a little bit, please. Thank you. And maybe just make it a little bit larger. Can you zoom in a little bit? Thank you very much. The general consensus of opinion was that although Stop the 70 Tour had served its purpose, the organisation which had been set up should not be disbanded, but should remain as a latent power in the event of any other apartheid team endeavouring to enter Great Britain. It was felt also that the numbers of supporters who had been mobilised so successfully over the past months should not be left to dissipate their enthusiasm, and it was essential Stop the 70 Tour found another cause as soon as possible. Discussions would take place with group leaders to seek their ideas of possible targets, but one which received the most, sorry if you can just scroll down. General support was the Kabora Bassa Dam project. It was therefore seen most likely that those who remain supporters of Stop the 70 Tour, now that the tour has been cancelled, will have their thoughts directed towards this scheme. The Kabora Bassa Dam project, there was a group called the Dam Busters Mobilisation Committee. Is that what's envisaged there? That the Stop the 70 Tour supporters would focus their attentions instead on the Dam Busters Mobilisation Committee, or just causes or other campaigning groups towards the aim of the Dam Busters Mobilisation Committee, which was to stop the building of that dam? Can you remember?
I don't remember the specific meeting or the specific proposal, but there were clearly discussions that I do remember about what we do with the 70 Tour now that it's achieved its objective, which is a very unusual situation for a political group like this to be in. And I was certainly someone who was arguing that with all this mobilization, we would know, we'd have the names and details of thousands of people around the country who'd taken the time and trouble to get in touch with us, and this that a movement could be made or reinforced out of this. I don't remember that there was ever an agreement on a target or a focus for such a group, and I don't and I'm pretty sure that there wasn't, and that therefore the Kabora Bassa Dam development happened, the mobilization happened independently of any influx from STSD. Individuals may well have gone, and I believe that Christabel Gurney, who's on this afternoon, will be able to give you better information on that
Thank you.
than I could. My experience of that discussion was that the idea of maintaining STSD as a separate activity, obviously with some change of name and focus, was not implemented. And in the sense that the group was, I don't know exactly how democratic it was. Obviously, the people who turned up to demonstrations had no vote or not necessarily any voice. And so the relatively small number of people were involved in organizing. And for whatever reason, by whatever dynamic internal of that group, which I wasn't central to, basically it was wound up. That there was no successful organization, which I thought was disappointing and a waste.
Can we move on very quickly, please, to the, sorry, we'll just look at this.
If my answers are too long.
It's this, the next document is MPS dash 0736399. And it's at tab 10, Your Honour, of your Honour's hard copy bundle. So. Thank you. This is a report which you deal with in your witness statement between paragraphs 7 and 10 about a meeting said to have taken place in your room at or certainly at the LSE, about a plan to form a group called Keep Politics Out of Cricket Committee, and to circulate a petition and invite signatories to the petition to attend the ground, which would have resulted in a confrontation between demonstrators and the police. And this report says that an advertisement was placed in the Telegraph and in the Times with a box number. And if we scroll down, we can see the text that appeared in the Telegraph advertisement. Paragraph 4, in the personal column of the Daily Telegraph, cricket lovers help circulate a petition to save the 70s tour, keep politics out of cricket. And then a right CL 11182 Daily Telegraph EC 4. And I think that you say in your witness statement that this was a complete fiction created by an acquaintance of yours who wanted to discredit you and your political affiliations, to undermine you in the eyes of another. And this was a complete fiction that has been reported by the undercover police officer. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Now,
Would you like me to expand on that? I could do so.
Well, I don't want to trespass into any matters that might be private to you, because I note that you, of course, you don't necessarily need to give us the background, but I just wanted to ask you this. It's said to be a meeting that took place in your room with a number of other people, including somebody who'd not previously taken any part in any Stop the 70s tour activity. And that's in paragraph 3. And the text that apparently appeared in the Daily Telegraph gives a box number. And I just wanted to ask you this, that box number, it would mean, wouldn't it, that this advertisement couldn't on its face be linked to you?
Had I put it in, it would not have been traceable, no. Yeah.
No. And it appears that the report seems to say that on the 11th of May, this this advertisement did appear in the Daily Telegraph. Can you recall that? Do you know anything about that?
No, I had nothing to do with any of this. And it's interesting, if you go scroll up a bit, you see this one says information inquired from a reliable source. It's not from a reliable and delicate source. So I guess it's coming from some different source. It's not, and evidently it's not from the meeting. It's something that's been acquired outside the meeting. I don't know by what mechanism this was noticed and brought to the police's attention and linked to me, since it seems the advertisement doesn't mention me. Possibly special branch approaching the newspaper to say who put this advert in. I don't know. To whom would it be sent? My guess is this was not the only example of its kind. There was another one at very much the same period, inviting people to write in for pornographic material to me by name. But this was in, I think that one was in either City Limits or Time Out, I can't remember. And that one spotted by a friend of mine who happened to be doing the layout on the magazine. That was
presumably in order to link it to you, that friend of yours, you would have to be named. You were named in that advertisement, were you? That's
I was named in that. My guess is the other one could only have been that all this stuff from people writing to me from the box number. The box number would come to me, and I would therefore be aware of the risk that if I went on seeing the person that I was seeing, that all this stuff could be escalated. That's all I can think. But it has nothing to do with politics. It's everything to do with jealousy and rage and upset.
Thank you very much.
And it's a bit shocking to see it here in a public inquiry.
Thank you. We can take that document down now, please.
Ms. Hammerstone, I think it's right to say, isn't it, that this document is not, we think, an SDS document.
Ah,
that's right.
So maybe special branch. Right. Yeah,
that's right. I'm grateful. Final document before we move on to the arrest and prosecution at the Star and Garter. At UCPI 000008245, please. I should say this is a very poorly, a very poor quality document, and it's quite difficult to read. This is a document, a report about the meeting of the London Action Committee Against Racialism, which appears to have been held at a private house on the 10th of September 1971. The subject of the meeting is mainly a protest to be arranged at the Miss World competition in 1971. And if we scroll down to paragraph 4 and 5, please. The plan of action would be similar to that of the previous year. After gaining admission, they hope to generally disrupt the contest. If, however, access to the Albert Hall was something, the plans would be made to sabotage the news broadcasting vehicle, which were usually parked in the vicinity. In the previous year, it's right, isn't it? There'd been a disruption of the Miss World contest by the Women's Liberation Movement. Is that right? Or Women's Liberation Front? Can you recall that?
Yeah. I didn't know the previous year, but it makes sense, yes.
And this was a plan to stage something similar.
So it seems, yes.
But if not, to sabotage the news broadcasting vehicle. How would that have been achieved, to sabotage the news broadcasting vehicle? Can you recall?
I have no recollection of this at all. To what extent was this connected to STST? I see Peter Hames' name is just visible at the bottom. I don't know who was, without the full document, I don't know where this was or who was participating.
If we just scroll down, we can see that you were present, but other names present have been redacted for privacy purposes. So you were present at this meeting, but is your evidence that you've got no recollection of it?
I'm afraid not. No.
Okay. Just in the paragraph that's visible there, paragraph 7, on Tuesday, 21st September 1971, Peter Hain was due to, I think it must say, appear at Bow Street Magistrates Court. Somebody who's redacted it for privacy reasons at the earliest, I think that must be opportunity, would liaise with the Young Liberals in the hope that a combined effort could be made to disrupt the court proceedings together with a demonstration. Can you recall any conversations of that nature?
Sorry. No, this is, I'm assuming that I was actually there. I don't know who else was there. I can't imagine what the nature of the meeting was, or that I would have been in any way involved with that aspect, since it seemed to be a Young Liberal thing.
So you can't recall what might have been envisaged for the disruption of the court proceedings?
No, absolutely not.
Thank you. We can take that document down now, please. I'm now going to move on to the final topic, which is the demonstration at the Star and Garter Hotel, the subsequent arrest and conviction at the Magistrates Court. Oh, there seems to be I'm just looking at a purple screen. I wonder if that document can be fully taken down so I can. Thank you. We understand that the plan at the Star and Garter Hotel, where the English rugby team was staying prior to their departure for South Africa, was to attempt to disrupt their departure to the airport. Is that right? To interfere with their taking an aeroplane to fly to South Africa to begin their tour. Is that right?
Ideally, have them miss the plane. Yes.
And you say in your witness statement that the plan had been to block their coach, which was due to take them to the airport, in the car park. So block the passage of the coach from the car park to the road to take them to the airport. And the demonstration was staged in the car park. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a plan, it seems, that took shape at the house of Ernest Rodker, and HN 298 Mike Scott, the undercover police officer, was present at that meeting, it seems. Can you recall Mike Scott or somebody of that name being involved in anything about this matter?
No, zero. And from the statement of HN 298, who I gather is Mike Scott, we don't know what his real name is. And I've had no photographs of him at the time, which would enable me to identify him. But from his own evidence, and I accept some of this is almost certainly true, he appeared on that afternoon, or was it morning? I don't even know what time of day it was, having, he said, been told about this meeting by Peter Hain's mother, whom he had phoned. So he'd phoned up someone who was a dedicated and experienced South African political activist who'd been exiled to this country, who'd been the subject of amazing police intrusive behavior in South Africa. And she is supposed to have told him, oh, if there's something interesting going on this afternoon, why not go to this address in Fulham? I find this so implausible. But the point is, this guy therefore shows up, having had no contact whatsoever with the group, having heard about this meeting somehow. Now, he's not, presumably they're not obliged to tell the truth, but it does seem to me more likely that they'd obtained their information in some other way, possibly by a telephone tap or some other thing. I don't know. But the result is he parachutes into this meeting and is accepted because we were not security conscious. We didn't worry. He said, I heard about this from your mum or something. I don't know what he may have said. And we were milling around. In fact, I'm sure Peter wasn't there. So, because Peter didn't get involved in these sorts of activities. So I guess we took it to him for granted because the only people who knew about this were people that had been told by people who were already involved in the special action group. So you may say that was naive of us, but there we are. I have no visual recollection of him.
The special action group, having been formed in 1969 or thereabouts, was still ongoing, was it, in May 1972?
This was a sort of loose social contacts and friendship group, yes. So we knew some of the people, and I think ACAR, which you mentioned a meeting of, a document just now, that was one of the attempts to generate some kind of continuing activity from STST. We were not part of ACAR, but we were an informal group that thought we'd like to do some more stuff on the apartheid question, which was our main preoccupation at the time. I think you should realize that at the time, South Africa was the dominant political activity for those who were progressive, just as some years later, Vietnam became the central activity, and as now, in the same way, Palestine is the center of activity for people who care about human rights. So that you need to understand its status, that we were not just dilettantes saying, oh, let's have another go at South Africa. This was a concern that had been going on by then, since the boycott of South African goods started, which was some 10 to 15 years previously. It's been a continuing thread of activity. So we gathered together and we did various actions together. I can't remember all of them, but one of them was around there was the publicity that we picked up for a trade center that was going to be, South African trade center that was going to be located in St. Martin's Lane in an office building there. And we did various activities around there to make it clear to the people who might be letting it to them that this would cause trouble. And we had demonstrations there. So this was not a one-off activity, the hotel in Richmond, but it was probably, I think, the last activity that we did in that way.
Right, thank you. Can we now look at some of the documents and try and piece together a kind of an account from the available documents, please? Can we have up on screen MPS-05-26782? And once there, can we go to page 9, please? This is a composite document, and so we're going to be sort of dotting around a little bit, I'm afraid. This is the officer's report about events of that day. And he begins his report setting out that this was it was initiated by a meeting at Ernest Rodker's home address, and goes on to say that there were 21 people present. At the bottom of paragraph 2, he says this: there appeared to be only a small group of 3 or 4 who had actually been involved from the beginning of the planning of what might correctly be described as a military-style operation. Rodker was the key figure of this group, which also included Jonathan Rosenhead. Is that right? Were you and Ernest Rodker 2 of the main instigators and organisers of the activities of this group? In particular, in the planning of this particular event, would you say?
I think that's right. I'm sure there were others, but we were certainly deeply involved. To call it a military-style operation is overestimating the chain of command that we had. But we did try to think through what you might call a deployment, how we might manage to make that parking lot hard for the coach to get out of. It would have been foolish to go there without thinking that through.
Yes. Scrolling on down the document, please. Rodker, with the help of a fairly accurate hand-drawn map of the relevant part of Richmond, indicated where people and cars should be positioned according to the turn of events, and outlined a variety of manoeuvres designed to cope with most eventualities. And paragraph 4 sets out the detailed plan that was to be put into place. After some discussion about who should fill what roles, which was governed to a large extent by whether or not they had a car which could be used, it was agreed that privacy would be the strikers. It was their job to turn off the fuel supply to the England rugby team's coach or otherwise immobilise it, and then to indicate to somebody else who's been redacted who will be playing football in a nearby field that it had been done. They in turn would wait until the players began to board the coach and then indicate to somebody who's been transcribed as PT, who would be stationed on Richmond Hill, looking down upon them. It was his job to inform Rodker and somebody else that the players were boarding the coach and that they should block the Petersham Road side of the car park with their cars. After a time lapse of 1.5 minutes, the other 3 cars, also parked on Richmond Hill, were to block the Nightingale Lane car park exit. The drivers of the vehicles were then to lock them up and block the path of the coach with their bodies. To complicate matters further, Rodker had ordered 2 skips to arrive at the upper part of the car park at 4 p.m. You say in your witness statement that you think that sounds broadly accurate. Is that right? That was the plan?
Yes, I think it's actually rather impressive. Remember, we're doing all this without mobile phones, so I'm not quite clear how the signalling was going on. I imagine people up on a hill waving to somebody down below who could see them, or vice versa. But yes, I think Ernest was probably more involved in that than the organisation than I was, but it looked like quite a well thought out plan.
You have submitted to the inquiry a series of printouts of the area, and perhaps we could just, I don't know quite how this is going to work remotely, but perhaps we can just try and just have a little look to see whether we can make it clearer as to the geography. They are at UCPI 000003407, please, if we can just have that up. If this is simply not going to work, then perhaps we'll abandon it, but we'll have a go. This right? This shows the outside of what was then the Sarangata Hotel. Is that right?
Yes, I think I'm guessing this is. I don't think this is the part of the car park that I was in. This is I think a lane that's leading from the main road to the hotel, and then there's another. Sorry, you can't see me, but if looking at the picture off to the left, I think there was another car park, another entrance. I think you come in one way and out the other, and vice versa. And I think the coach was on the other side.
We've got an aerial view coming up, so perhaps we can scroll on to the next page, please. And I think you'll have to turn the image if that's to.
It's a very nice hotel, by the way. My brother had his 60th birthday party there, as it happened, so I was able to revisit.
It looks delightful. This shows a slightly different view of the hotel and car park, and you see. Did you say round to the left?
I think so. That's going from memory.
And that appears to be a road leading up. If you look at the extreme left of that image, a road leading up past the hotel on a slight incline. Is that right?
Going down the side, that is, I think, the public road, probably. Right. I'm not quite, I may have got the car parks in the wrong order, but there was one, I think there's a way in and out from that lane into different parts of the car park.
The next image may make it a little bit clearer because it's a Google Maps image. It may not, but we'll just look at it briefly. If you can just help me with this as somebody who evidently knows the geography. We can see the little sort of hotel sign in the middle of the image there, the little kind of little bed sign, with a road, Nightingale Lane, leading from there to the Petersham Road. And then running a little bit further up the page, Richmond Hill running down the page past the words "the Wick." The parts in white there, is that's the hotel premises? Is that right? That's the car parks and the hotel itself. And the roads are then in white: Nightingale, Petersham Road and Richmond Hill, which are the roads that we're concerned with. Does that sound right?
Yes, it doesn't actually look at all like how I remember it, but Nightingale Lane is something, I guess that's probably about a few hundred yards long. I'm not sure. It's
Right.
not. It's not quite as short, maybe, as it looks there, and it's almost a country lane. So,
And a part of the plan was that that there are evidently two exits to the car park: the Petersham Road exit and the Nightingale Lane exit. So it looks as if there's a exit at the top of Petersham Road going down from the hotel, and then one leading out from the other part of the car park. Is that right? I mean, it's very difficult to see from.
I'm sorry, I should have obviously gone back and had a look at it before.
Don't worry.
Although they may have changed their inlets by now.
Don't worry. Let's just move on, please. But next page, please. Page 4. Actually, I'm not really sure this is going to assist, but I want you to have an opportunity to look at it since you've provided it. What we can see there is, in fact, that's the other part of the Star and Garter, isn't it, rather than the hotel?
That's the wrong building.
Yes, the Star and Garter Hotel.
That was for ex-servicemen and so on. It's now been converted into luxury flats, I believe, but that's not it.
The Star and Garter Hotel, in fact, is at the top left, isn't it, where we can see very faintly written Nightingale Lane. It's just up there, and the width.
You can see the Star and Garter Hotel from there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
As
Okay.
far as I'm aware. I think it's further away than that.
And over
It's up on the top of the hill, and where it's the Petersham Hotel is further down towards the river.
Thank you. Thank you. Over the page, please. Page 5 gives a rather more extreme sort of zoom out.
You
So
can
we
see there the distance is much greater.
Yes. So we can see the Wick is right up next to Richmond Hill. And the restaurant at the Petersham Hotel is down towards Petersham Road, right at the bottom of that, towards the bottom of that stretch.
Yes.
And a Nightingale Lane leading from the Petersham Hotel to the Petersham Road there. And finally, please, the final one of your documents that you have provided to the inquiry, which was probably maybe the clearest. Next page, please, page 6. Which shows, doesn't it, the car park in a little bit more detail, perhaps, and the positioning of the Petersham Road and the Nightingale Lane. Do you know where the individual cars were parked and what entrances were supposed to be blocked? Can you help us with that?
I can't even remember for sure where the coach was.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that, so my car was one of the ones that was used to block, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's in that car park that's going up the hill towards Nightingale Lane.
Yes.
That's my guess. That's where it was, because I think there was an exit there, and we put some couple of cars there to stop the coach getting out too easily.
Right.
And I think there was another exit onto Petersham Road. But I'm not sure. It doesn't look as if there is necessarily an exit there. I think that the coach was probably located in the shadow that's just behind the hotel, now the shadow that the hotel is casting. That would be my best guess.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we return, please, now to MPS-05-26782, and this time to page 10. Could you be to repeat the number? It is MPS-05-26782. Thank you. And can we turn to page 10? of that document. And just enlarge it a little, please. This is going back to the report by HN 298 of the events of that day. And just looking at paragraph 6, before report departing for Richmond, Rodker gave up the telephone number of several solicitors and the NCCL. He destroyed all the notes he'd made about the day's activities and told the others that if they were arrested, it was essential that they should deny having met together previously and should say that they had received a note through the post outlining the activities, the action which had been planned. He added that this was to squash any possibility of a charge for conspiracy. Was it anticipated that you, therefore, that you may be arrested for the action that you took on that day?
I don't think there was any. I don't remember discussion about conspiracy. It wasn't a major part. This was maybe like a little warning that you give to people. Like when people were going out on demonstrations, they sometimes people used to hand out leaflets saying, "If you are arrested, this is what your rights are. This is what you should do." I think this was more a low-key precautionary statement. I don't think. I don't remember being aware of it. I don't remember destroying any notes. I don't think I knew what the law on conspiracy was. So
it wasn't in anticipation of the commission of any criminal offence, you don't think?
No, it's just that I think we were vaguely aware that the things that were not themselves crimes could become a crime if there was conspiracy to do them, and so that we didn't want to run that risk. Something in that area, anyhow.
And can you recall? You may not. Did you go straight from Mr. Rodker's house to the Star and Garter Hotel? Can you recall that?
I must have done. I cannot remember. Actually, I can't remember the meeting at Ernest's house or the journey. I just remember being in the car park. But there's been lots of time for the memories to go.
Paragraph 8 in this report describes the movement of the cars into the position and the arrival of the police. And by 3:55 p.m, all were in their allotted positions, and almost immediately the signal was received for Rodker and Privacy to leave. After 1.5 minutes, the other cars departed from the Nightingale Lane exit. As they did so, a lorry containing an empty skip turned in front of them and drove into the car park. The 3 cars followed were confronted by a police officer who made no attempt to stop them blocking the coach's exit. They positioned the cars, locked them and left, later to join other demonstrators standing by the coaches with placards. It would appear that the officers present in the car park had deterred Privacy from making any attempt at immobilizing the coach. Does that roughly accord with your memory of the episode?
It's not inconsistent. Certainly, I don't remember the detail, but there's nothing there I would seem to be wrong.
Can we move on to paragraph 10, please? Paragraph 9 sets out the attempts to move the vehicles to block that were blocking the passage of the coach. And paragraph 10 says a melee ensued with the demonstrators sitting on and in front of the vehicles whilst they were being lifted. One of the hotel staff succeeded in ripping off half the front bumper of one car from its mounting. I think that was in fact your car. And the police took responsibility for that damage. Can you recall a melee? Would you have described it as a melee?
There was there was a group of people who clustered around the coach, and I imagine that sitting down, but there was no fisticuffs. Nobody was trying to restrain us in any way. And by the way, I don't think it was the bumper. I thought it was the roof rack that got damaged, but who knows? It doesn't matter. Now, the officer may have accepted responsibility for it, but I never got any money.
Can we just very briefly return to paragraph 5, just slightly up the page? Paragraph 5, the final two sentences of that paragraph. Rosenhead volunteered the use of 3 flares which he had with him, but there was not much support for this. Later at the car park, he lit and threw a flare. Can you recall doing that?
Absolutely not. I think this possibly mistaken identity. It's not likely. Most of this report, it seems reasonably accurate, apart from a slight inflation of language. I wouldn't have even had anything to light the flare with. I have no recollection of ever owning a flare in my life. This seems possibly somebody else, but I don't remember any smoke in the or light or anything of that kind in the whole event. It's all a beautiful sunny day, and I don't remember anything consistent with that. Doesn't necessarily mean I didn't do it, but I certainly don't think I did.
Let's look just very briefly at another report, please. MPS-07-37087. This is tab 6 of your bundle, sir. Thank you. Paragraphs, the second paragraph and the third paragraph. This is the report from the officer one of the officers that attended this incident. And the second and third paragraph set out what they found there. The patrolling officer, SBS, attended at once. Just after 4:10 p.m, about 30 persons arrived and mingled with a crowd of hotel staff and residents and some building workers in the car park of the hotel. Two of them left Morris Minor motor vehicles in the car park entrance at Nightingale Lane, blocking the way out for the rugby team's coach, which was about to leave. With help from members of the public and police who've been called to the scene, the SBS tried to move one of the vehicles. Then some of the 30 people who just arrived started sitting down in the road outside the same entrance and completely blocked the way. They did so in groups of 3 or 4 at a time. As each group sat, SPS asked them to move. They refused and they were arrested, whereupon a fresh group replaced them. 14 people acted in this way, taken in vans to this station and charged. Does that accord with your memory of how this episode played out? That you
I don't remember it in that detail. I don't remember this idea of people sitting down one by in small groups rather than all together. It could well have happened. I wouldn't substantiate that or deny it. It wouldn't make that much difference if we'd all sat down together or done it in groups. And I can't think quite why we would have done it in groups, but maybe we did.
It's right, I think, from your witness statement, it's right to say you've got little independent recollection of the court proceedings that followed your arrest. Your first appearance, it seems, was on the 14th of May. Sorry, we can take that document down now, please. When it appears that not guilty pleas were entered to obstructing a highway and to a new charge with obstructing you were charged with obstructing the police on that occasion as well. Not guilty plea entered to that as well. Thereafter, you were bailed, it seems, until the 14th of June, and then 2 meetings took place of your group at private houses. We're just going to look very briefly at those meetings, please. Can we have up MPS-07-37109? This is a meeting which took place on the 21st of May, so 6 or 7 days after that first court appearance at your house. And 13 people were in attendance, including, as we now know, HN298 Mike Scott, and also including Ernest Rodker and Christabel Gurney. This was a meeting, was it not, where you discussed your forthcoming court appearances, and how you were proposing to deal with the case in hand. Is that right?
So it seems, yes.
Paragraph 2, it's set out there that you had obtained a number of press photographs, and in fact you've submitted a number of photographs with your witness statement. Are those the same photographs that are referred to in that paragraph?
They must be, yes.
Thank you. I'm not going to take you through those, but those have been now published. Paragraph 6, please, if we just scroll down the page slightly.
Can I just say on that the stuff about photographs showing people in the road, I was never in the road, and yet I was accused of being in the road. So I don't know whether there was, as Ernest is reported as saying that he was photographed in the road. I just can't say, but if so, he was the exception. We were in the car park, and it's quite a large car park, as you saw, and we were near the hotel and not at the road end.
And that formed, I think, the basis of your defence for your trial. Is that right?
And there were photographs.
Paragraph 6. Yes. Rosenhead next began to compile a list of those who had witnessed the arrest of any of the others, but most could not recollect the more important details that had occurred. And then over the page, please. Finally, it was agreed that a small group, including Rosenhead, Rodker, and 2 others, would arrange an interview with Ben Bernberg, the solicitor, in about 10 days' time. Rodker suggested that all concerned should prepare a statement about what had happened and send it to Bernberg's home address to enable him to get a clear picture of what had happened. And in fact, you did, I think, speak to a solicitor and arrange for the solicitor to represent the group as a whole. Is that right?
Not just a solicitor. Ben Bernberg is a highly esteemed human rights lawyer of an older generation. He's still alive, I would say. He's a wonderful guy. I don't think he did become my own solicitor many years later, but I don't know who contacted him on this occasion.
The request for notes about what had happened. In fact, we have one such set of notes, do we not? I think you have submitted it, and perhaps we can have an extremely brief look at it. UCPI 00000033628, please. That just sets out the sort of covering letter, as it were, here with my rather uninformative account of the events of that fateful Friday afternoon. If we can turn on to page 2, please. This is at tab 17, sir, of the hard copy bundle. It's not terribly easy to read. The top paragraph sets out the movement of the cars that this individual witnessed, and the movement of the arrival of a delivery van and a skip at the car park. The skip, of course, having been organised by Ernest Rodker, and the people in the car park. The second paragraph says this: a smoke flare was set off at about 10 minutes after the start of the blocking attempt, but well away from the scene of the action. That's probably a reference, isn't it, to the flare that was mentioned in Mike Scott's report, but you say you don't think that was set off by...
Well, it might have been me, but I just don't remember it. I'm not.
Thank you.
I'm not in a position to deny something I can't remember.
The next paragraph reads, after about 20 minutes, most of the demonstrators had disappeared. I could only see Mike Scott and a girl whose name I believe was, and something being redacted, trying to prevent the police from moving a red Mini 2 roughly from the car park entrance. And then in the fourth paragraph, this writer says he then saw 4 demonstrators, including Mike Scott and Ernest Rodker, sitting on the grass verge of the road in police custody. You say you weren't aware of the presence of Mike Scott. Does it follow then you can't really recall who was doing what and whether he might have been actively involved in the...
I didn't know he existed until these papers started to emerge.
Thank you. Can we move on, please, to the next document? I'm going to take this quite shortly. MPS-0737108. This is a report of a second meeting of some of those arrested after that demonstration at the Star and Garter, held very shortly before your second appearance at court. This is on the 11th of June. Again, Mike Scott, the undercover officer, was present at this meeting. It appears that at this meeting you gave an account about your meeting with the solicitor Ben Bernberg. Can you recall giving such an account? Perhaps you can't.
The account being what, sorry?
Account of your meeting with Ben Bernberg.
I can't see that in the text. Rosenhead, a report, no, well, who knows what I...
It may not much matter. Perhaps we can just move on to paragraph 7, please.
It's because it's all deleted that I can't. I've got really no recollection of what it might have been that that I was reporting. That might have helped, but
some matters have been redacted from this document because they contain matters of legal professional privilege, which is why they can't be.
Yeah, I wasn't objecting. I was just explaining why I couldn't. Yeah, really relate to that question.
Paragraph 7, can I just ask this? There was some concern over the costs of the case, and there was unanimous agreement that these should be defrayed equally, regardless of individual fines and costs. Rodker suggested forming a defence fund as a means of raising the proportion of the expenses. It decided to set up the Richmond Defence Fund. Privacy agreed to insert an appeal in Peace News, and Rosenhead added, and Christopher Gurney can do the same with the AAM, the anti-apartheid movement. Was it anticipated that the anti-apartheid movement might be able to meet some of the costs of your defence costs?
There was no expectation, but it was an exploration that since Christabel has been involved from then till now with anti-apartheid matters, that she would be well placed to find out if they would do it. Thank
you. Just moving on very briefly, please, to paragraph 8. The only fundamental difference to be resolved was that at least 3 of the number, and it sets out the names there, wanted to try to establish what they described as a precedent for furthering Mackenzie representation. Not only did they want, as is traditionally permitted, a layman in the court who could suggest lines of questioning for the defendant to pursue, but furthermore, a layman who was able to represent them in the same way that a solicitor might. They anticipated that a magistrate might not permit this and that they would be granted a further remand of 1 month for their case to be presented to the Queen's Bench Division. Do you have any recollection of a further remand after your case was heard on the 14th of, you appeared in court on the 14th of June? It doesn't appear that you were convicted on that day, unlike others. Might you have been part of this group that sought the furthering of Mackenzie representation? If you don't remember, then
yes, who knows? I didn't understand why I was. I think Ernest was remanded as well for a further period, and I didn't know why it wasn't dealt with. Some people were dealt with summarily on the occasion, and others were not. Okay. And I noticed I got a bigger fine. Some people got £2 fine, and I got £10 fine. And I don't know why I was privileged in that way. I didn't do more than the others. It was the same offence.
Sarah, I noticed the time. I've only got 2 more reports left to look at. It's likely to take about 10 minutes. I don't know whether it's more sensible to complete this now before breaking, or whether to adjourn for lunch and come back at. Sorry, I'm told the shorthand writer requires a break. I'm awfully sorry. But I've literally got 10 minutes more, so it won't be very long after lunch.
May I just ask the shorthand writer, through you please, to reconsider. You've got 10 minutes left. We then have to have a quarter of an hour break to permit anyone who has any questions to put them to you. It may well be that Mr. Ryder wants to re-examine, and all of that is going to take us well into the lunch break if we run until we finish it. It seemed to me to be sensible for you to finish your 10 minutes now, and for us then to break for lunch when all of those things can take place without interrupting proceedings further. Otherwise, Ms. Gurney is going to be, I think, unreasonably delayed.
I'm told that the shorthand writer is agreeable to that course, so we can complete this now. I'm grateful.
May I just confirm with Professor Rosenhead that does not inconvenience him?
That's fine.
Good.
Thank you very much. Penultimate report, please. MPS -052678-2, which is the composite that we've already looked at, but I want to just look at a different page of it, please. 052678-2. Thank you. And can we go to page 4, please? Paragraph 6 of that. This is about your appearance in court on the 14th of June of 1972. Paragraph 6 indicates that at the conclusion of the proceedings, Christabel Gurney and Mike Scott, HN 298, were found guilty and fined and conditionally discharged. But paragraph 5, it appears that your case and that of Ernest Rodker were adjourned until the 28th of June. Have you got any recollection of why that happened?
No, and apparently there were 2 other people as well with us, and I have no idea why we were selected for this treatment. Sorry.
Can we go back, please, to page 3 of this document, just to see if this sheds any light on it? It may not, but I just want to ask you. This is the STS management report on this incident, reporting back as to what had happened from HN 294. Who was the DI of the SDS at the time, who says that in the 3rd paragraph down, having said that various appeared on the 14th of June, the remaining 7 asked for their cases to be heard at a higher court and have been further remanded until the 28th of June 1972. Can you recall requesting that your case was heard by the Crown Court?
I assume this was part of the advice by Ben Bernberg, and I assume that he was saying there was an advantage to going to a higher court. Maybe you can express your arguments in a fuller way. I don't know. And I guess that the 7 who didn't do that were ones who just wanted to get it disposed of now and not have to come back again another time. So I assume it was that sort of self-selection rather than anything else.
We can take that document down now, please. The point at issue during your trial, you say in your witness statement, was the location of the demonstration and whether or not you were obstructing a highway or simply impeding the progress of the coach in the car park. Is that right? That was the main point at issue.
Well, that was the issue about whether we were guilty as charged. Obviously, the main issue was about apartheid South Africa, but that was not.
Sorry, that was the main issue. That was the main pointed issue during the course of the court proceedings. And you say that whilst you have no independent recollection of the court proceedings, you assume you pleaded guilty and had a trial on that issue.
Pleaded not guilty.
Not guilty and had a trial.
Yes, yes. I remember that must have been the 28th of June.
And you say that you seem to remember that you gave evidence that you were in the car park, and you seem to remember others saying the same. Is that right?
Yeah. I'd just like to say my mother, my late mother, was a magistrate up in Liverpool, and she knows that I tell the truth. And she also knew that police officers tell the truth. So when I told her what had happened with police officers basically lying through their teeth about where we were, she found this really a lot of cognitive dissonance. She didn't know how to handle this, but she had to believe that police officers could lie, or that I did. So I just, I recall this issue very acutely because of that.
Yes, yes. The final document I want you to just very briefly look at is MPS-07-37126, please. And whilst that's just being obtained, you say that you seem to remember giving evidence, you seem to remember others giving evidence. Can you recall, does it follow, since you can't recall Mike Scott at all, you can't recall whether he would have given evidence during the course of the trial?
No, no.
Or in fact, whether he was in the same court proceedings at that stage as you were?
He was remanded to the higher court as well, was he?
No, it doesn't appear so.
So the proceedings in the first court were extremely abbreviated, as I recall, because they processed it all very quickly. I think that the fact that he was there is so outrageous that he sat in on our meetings with Ben Bernberg, because Ben came to the court, I think, on that occasion. So he would have been privy not just to reports of our interaction with the lawyer, but actually there, and then clearly reporting on that to the police so they would know that we were going to be making a case about it being in the wrong place. All of that seemed to me a total miscarriage of justice, and speaks very badly for the police ethics of that time, or of that place.
This final document just sort of perhaps completes this episode. Can we turn on to page 3, please, of this document? Towards the bottom of the page, the bottom 2 entries, that we can see that Ernest Rodker appears to have been convicted of obstructing a highway and obstructing the police, and he was fined £2 with £10 cost and a conditional discharge on the 12th of July 1972. Your name appears thereafter, also charged with obstructing the highway and obstructing the police, also on the same date, but fined £10 with costs. But no evidence offers no evidence offered on the second charge, that of obstructing the police. Can you recall that?
Well, I didn't obstruct the police, but it's interesting that that charge was dismissed. Ernest was not dismissed. He was conditional discharge and bound over or whatever for 2 years. Yet he gets only a £2 fine and I get a £10 fine. I'm not quite sure what I did to annoy the magistrate. Really weird.
Does it follow, since you had no awareness of Mike Scott in your group, that you had no awareness during the course of those criminal proceedings that there was an undercover officer in your midst who weren't informed of that?
No, and reading the documents, it seems that nobody in the court was informed. Indeed, I think well, I'd be interested to hear brackets Mike Scott's evidence. I think he's talking on Tuesday but in his written evidence, he doesn't say that anybody in the court was informed, which is extreme.
Thank you, Professor Rosenhead. And you've set out in your witness statements the consequence that you see as having flowed from that lack of disclosure, and those are all going to be taken into account by the chairman when he considers what information to pass on to those that might need to see it. That completes the questions I
Can
have.
I just say one more thing, or are you going to give me a chance? Or I didn't interrupt you, sorry.
No, not at all, not at all. No, Professor, that was going to be my final question.
Okay, fine.
We have your very helpful and complete witness statement that will be taken into account. But I wanted to ask you whether there was anything that you wanted to add that you hadn't set out in that document that you wish the chairman to take into account.
But clearly, I mean, this inquiry is about what happened then, but it's also clearly it's supposed to inform decision making now. And I do think that the emphasis then entirely on liberal radical and trade union organizations, and to the virtually complete neglect of any danger from the right, which arguably was much greater, is striking. And I'm worried. I think we should think about this in terms of what's going on now. I am concerned in terms of the behavior of my very own undercover police officer about the current legislation, about making it actually changing the legal basis for covert human intelligence sources activities. So I do think that I hope that this inquiry will perhaps retrospectively get those powers reconsidered. And the general picture that's going on at the moment of reinforcing police powers is worrying, given the evidence that we have in this case, and there is a continuing police culture, if you like, of the abuse of power. And I don't think that, I think the people are doing this valuable service for the community, which is raising issues which are uncomfortable. They were uncomfortable for the powers that be in 1972, even though we now think that opposition to apartheid is, everybody is against it, but they weren't then. And that people who are pushing against the established view should not be subjected to these kinds of intrusive powers unnecessarily.
Thank you, Professor Rosenhead. So those are all the questions I have for Professor Rosenhead.
Thank you. May I ask Mr. Ryder, if he is listening, whether he's likely to have any re-examination?
Thank you, sir. At the moment, I don't anticipate any questions.
Thank you. I asked Mary to help with timing so that Ms. Gurney is not told to appear when, or requested to appear when she's not actually needed.
Yes, of course.
Very well. We will adjourn now until 2:15, when, if there are any further questions of Professor Rosenhead, they will have been forwarded to Ms. Hummerston, and she will, if she thinks it right, ask them. Otherwise, we will then proceed to hear the evidence of Ms. Gurney.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now take a break for lunch. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join their breakout rooms, please. Hearings will resume at 2:15 p.m. Thank you.